Hey everyone, I'm John Bozek with Electric Bike Report, and in this video I'll be talking with you about the Tenways CGO600 Pro. This is a pretty lightweight e-bike designed for use in urban environments, and it's a more refined version of the standard CGO600. Now, Tenways is a bit more established in Europe than they are here in the US, and as such, this bike has a lot of influence from that part of the world. I think most obviously with its visual design. As you can see, it's just really clean and streamlined with a nice paint job, a fully integrated battery, and this super unique front headlight. With that simple but really kind of elegant European design influence in mind, we wondered if that would extend to the bike's functionality, performance, and feel. Come along with me while we take a look at some of this bike's highlights, and then we'll talk specs before moving on to its test results. Let's get into it. Before we get started, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. This helps support the channel and makes it easier for you to see more of our content when we upload new videos. We are always talking about awesome e-bikes like the CGO600 Pro, and we'd really love to help you find one that's just right for you. So right up front, I want to point out the fact that the CGO600 Pro is a bit of a mouthful. So from here on out, I'll mostly just stick with calling it the 600 Pro. Also, there are a couple of different versions of this bike depending on where you live. We have the US spec model here, and there are a few key differences between this and the UK or EU models. First, the Pro designation makes a bit more of an impact here, as the US version comes with a MyVice 350 watt rear hub motor, while the European bike uses a 250 watt motor. The bike's maximum speed here in the US is also a bit faster. This is a Class 1 e-bike, so it can get up to 20 miles per hour or 32 kilometers per hour, but overseas it's limited to 16 miles per hour or 25 kilometers per hour. Both versions of the bike have the same battery though. That's a 36 volt 10 amp hour or 360 watt hour battery, but those other differences in top speed and motor wattage result in different range estimates on the bike. Tenways advertises the US version with a range of up to 53 miles or 85 kilometers, and the EU version at 62 miles or 100 kilometers. Basically, with the same battery and both a smaller motor and a slower traveling speed, the EU version of the bike gets a bit more out of its battery. Moving on though, one of the best things about this bike is the fact that it comes with a torque sensor. This means that it has a seriously responsive motor that gives you more power as soon as you really start pedaling harder. It feels really similar to a non-electric bike, but it gives you the sensation of being like a pro cyclist. You can get up to speed incredibly quickly and easily with that motor assistance. This is a single speed drivetrain, so there's no shifting required. You still have the bike's pedal assist system to give you some flexibility in speed and motor assistance, but even that is a pretty simple setup. Many e-bikes we test have 5 or more levels of pedal assistance, which aren't always all that practical, but the 600 Pro uses just 3, and with so few, they really have to make a difference. These things in combination make for a really easy to use system that's functional but also not overly complicated. The bike's drivetrain also uses a Gates carbon belt instead of a chain, which is just one of many really nice high quality parts that we have here. We'll talk more about the rest shortly, but that belt drive doesn't require any grease or any maintenance, so it's a really clean system that isn't going to get your pants or your hands dirty, and you're also not going to have to replace it for somewhere in the neighborhood of 18,000 miles. Let's take a look at the bike's full list of specs, and then we'll see how all of its elements came together in terms of actual performance. To reiterate and sum up some of the things we covered in the last section, I'm gonna stick with only the specs and components on the US version of the 600 Pro that we have here. First and foremost, we again have the bike's MyVice 350 watt rear hub motor. I have to say, I really appreciated seeing a bit of extra power here. It's not uncommon for city bikes like this to only have 250 watts of nominal output, and I think the extra 100 watts made a big difference in some of our testing. That motor is paired with a 36 volt, 360 amp hour battery that uses LG cells, and of course it's fully integrated into the frame and matches the bike's paint job, so you'd hardly even know it was there. This is actually another really nice feature on a city bike. Many of the ones we've tested previously use batteries that are completely sealed inside the frame, meaning that A, you have to take the whole bike inside with you every time you need to charge it, and B, way down the line when you eventually need a battery replacement, you have to take it to a mechanic, and it's a complicated and expensive ordeal. Neither of those things are a problem here, and that's just really cool. Again, there's a Gates carbon drive with just a single speed. We talked about some of the pros with this already, but there are a couple of trade-offs that we'll talk about shortly. But I want to take one quick second to point out a tiny but really cool feature that relates to the belt. I already said that this thing will last for thousands and thousands of miles, but once it does eventually wear out, there's a pass-through in the seat stay on this side of the bike to make changing that belt easier. You just remove that little part of the frame and you're all set. There's no need to take the whole wheel off. Moving on though, the 600 Pro uses Tektro hydraulic disc brakes on 160 millimeter rotors. The wheels are 700C with 40 millimeter street tires. The bike doesn't come with a cargo rack, but one is available for purchase separately. There are both front and rear fenders included on the bike. These are metal, which is great for durability, but they can be a little noisy. We found that the brake housing on our bike was right up against the front fender and it banged around kind of a lot, especially on rough pavement. The saddle is a custom, very performance-oriented design. I wasn't a huge fan of it personally, but this style just typically isn't my jam. I do think it looks nice and it has an unusual smooth texture. There's a removable battery-powered taillight on the seat post that honestly feels a little tacked on to me. It's good to have and it's definitely better than nothing, but on a bike that's designed for the streets, I'd love to see an integrated rear light with brake lights instead. The front headlight is sort of the polar opposite. Of course, it looks incredible and it's got a pretty unique feature that I haven't seen before. There's a regulation in Germany that the headlight meets called STVZO, which is an acronym for words that I'm not going to try to pronounce, but basically it just means that the two headlight beams are directed downward, so they're not going to end up blinding someone on the road, and I really love little details like that. There's an adjustable stem, so that's going to help you find the right height and distance that fits you. And then the cockpit itself is pretty clean and simple. Again, we don't have a cassette on the back, so there's no shifter to worry about. So aside from some brake levers, we've just got the grips, which I thought were pretty comfortable for standard style grips. And of course the bike's small but really functional display. This packs in all the things you'd expect and a couple that you might not. Of course, there's a speedometer, there's a nice percentage-based battery readout, there's an indicator for your pedal assist or PAS setting, and you can even access a range calculation based on your current PAS setting and the battery's remaining charge. Finally, before we move on, the 600 Pro also pairs with the Tenways app. This essentially just gives you the ability to use your phone as a larger display that shows all of the same things that the one on the bike does, but there are a couple of other really awesome features too. The app actually offers navigation, and I love that on a bike like this that's made for cities, but you can also track your ride data over time, and the app includes a calendar for a day-by-day breakdown of your adventures. I think that covers just about everything though. Let's dive into our test data and talk some numbers. With the speeds at which e-bikes are capable of traveling, it is crucial that they have effective brakes. To evaluate brake systems, we pedal every e-bike we test up to 20 miles per hour and then hit the brakes to stop as quickly as we can while still maintaining control. We measure the distance it takes the bike to stop, repeat the process 2 more times, and then calculate an average stopping distance from those results. So again, the 600 Pro comes with Tektro hydraulic disc brakes on 160mm rotors on both the front and back wheels. With these, the bike ended up with an average stopping distance of 22 feet 11 inches, which is about 1.5 feet longer than our average when looking at the other city and commuter style e-bikes we've tested. That much of a difference is pretty negligible overall, so we're pretty happy with the bike's results here. It's worth pointing out though that we did notice that the wheels had a tendency to lock up when braking firmly. This wasn't a problem for us, just something I wanted to be clear on, and ultimately I think the bike's 40mm tires helped to give it some added stability that it otherwise might not have had on narrower tread. Another nice feature of the brake system is that it does not include a motor cutoff feature. This is something that might raise a red flag on a big and heavy bike with a cadence sensor, but in this case it has the benefit of allowing you to modulate and control your speed while still pedaling smoothly and easily, and this is going to give you more precise control if you're in high traffic areas that require careful maneuvering. For our circuit test, we pedal every e-bike around a 1-mile loop made up of 4 right turns and a small 30-foot hill. We do this first with no assistance from the motor, and then again in each pedal assist setting. This gives us an idea of the bike's motor engagement, its handling, and its speeds at those different PAS settings. One thing we haven't talked about so far is the 600 Pro's weight. This bike weighs just under 42 pounds, which isn't the lightest city bike we've tested, but is definitely on the lighter end of the spectrum of e-bikes in general. This came into play big time during the first lap of our circuit test, where we achieved a pretty impressive speed result. The bike's single-speed drivetrain did make pedaling uphill a bit tough. This is where you really feel those 42 pounds, but on flat ground, it was pleasantly functional as a non-electric bike. Of course, you don't get the flexibility granted by the pedal assist system, but this just goes to show that if you find yourself a few blocks from home and the bike's battery gives out, you're still going to make it just fine. In our second lap with the bike in its lowest assistance setting, PAS1, we really got to enjoy the power and responsiveness from its motor and torque sensor. As our data shows, we felt a jump in speed of over 3 miles per hour, which is pretty significant. On most e-bikes, I like to describe this setting as just taking their weight away, but on this bike, PAS1 did that and a whole lot more. The bike's higher settings, PAS2 and PAS3, provided increasingly more power, but the jumps weren't as drastic as going from no assistance to PAS1. I definitely had the most fun in PAS3 though, as you really get the most reward from the work that you're putting in. Overall, I think this bike's power is distributed well. I think its lowest setting is absolutely practical, and I have to say that the bike's torque sensor is a real joy to experience. This is what I love about e-bikes. Some of them can give you the sense of having superhero strength, and that's definitely what you get when riding the 600 Pro. Our range test is actually 2 separate trials where we pedal the bike until its battery runs out. The first test is done in the lowest pedal assist setting that provides constant input from the motor, and the second is done with maximum assistance. For each test, we measure the distance the bike was able to travel, and we compare that to the range advertised by the bike's manufacturer. In the case of the CGO600 Pro, Tenways advertises a range of 53 miles for the US version of the bike, and in our testing we measured just over 33 miles in PAS3 and just under 46 miles in PAS1. If we're comparing their 53 to our 46, the difference is pretty minimal in the grand scheme, and there are a few things to consider there. First, while our PAS1 result on this bike is fairly average, the max assist results are just straight up some of the best we've seen among city bikes with similar specs. Second, the 600 Pro offers a bit more power in its lowest setting than some of those other bikes, so it makes sense that its results would be a bit less extraordinary. Third, the range estimates from brands don't always account for real-world conditions like hills and weather, so that requires some wiggle room. But finally, 33 to 46 miles is a pretty serious amount of distance no matter how you look at it, and that's a pretty great result for such a slim and speedy bike. To test every bike's hill climbing ability, we take them to a local hill called Hellhole, which is a steep but paved path that's a third of a mile long with an average grade of 12%. This is a pretty serious challenge for most e-bikes, and some that we test don't make it all the way to the top. We do this test both in the max pedal assist setting and with just the throttle, if applicable, to see if a bike has what it takes to make the climb. So earlier I mentioned that the simplicity of the 600 Pro's single-speed drivetrain had some trade-offs, and those really came to the forefront in this test. Since this is a Class 1 e-bike with no throttle, we only had to climb Hellhole once with the bike in PAS3, and it was a pretty tough ride. We huffed and puffed our way to the top in 1 minute and 44 seconds with an average speed of just 10.4 miles per hour. Since the bike has no lower gears to make all of that work easier, we actually had to stand in order to get enough leverage to move the cranks, and that's not something we typically encounter with this test. We actually try to avoid it as much as possible for the sake of consistency, but there was no way it was going to be possible without standing on this bike. As you might expect, that placed the 600 Pro pretty far down in our list of similar city bikes we've tested, but we still have to give the bike some credit. First of all, because we ultimately made it to the top, and we probably couldn't have done that without motor assistance. To quote Tenways' product page, the bike is meant to unleash your inner champion, so it does place some emphasis on the rider pedaling, and that means you should expect to still have input on those uphill climbs. The bike's drivetrain was certainly a bit of an obstacle here, but its motor was still doing everything it could to help us out, and it did the job. But second, because Tenways understands the limitations of this bike. They advertise that the average rider can climb hills of up to 10 degrees with this thing, and that seems pretty accurate. On smaller hills outside of this test though, the bike did a lot better. It still makes you work for it, but it's actually a pretty fun workout, and you still get that feeling of super strength that I mentioned earlier. It's been a pretty interesting journey as we've gone over the CGO600 Pro. It's a pretty uncommon combination of elements on an e-bike, and I think we've seen the benefits that come with that as well as some of the compromises. It's probably pretty clear that the bike's single-speed drivetrain is going to be a really attractive feature to some riders and a bit of an unusual or intimidating factor to others. As someone without a lot of prior experience on bikes of this type, I have to say that, especially under normal conditions, this bike is a lot of fun to ride. That drivetrain is certainly a bit different, and it does require more effort than you might expect on an e-bike, but it also gives you a unique sense of direct connection with the bike that just gets amplified by its motor. The CGO600 Pro truly does feel natural and responsive to ride, and you're getting a pretty significant boost in return for your own effort thanks to its torque sensor. The fact that it's simple to operate and maintain just lends itself to being a dependable daily ride, and the fact that it looks so good means that you get to ride around in style. We'd love to see the bike feature a catchier name to match its unique looks and feel, and also make it easier to talk about, and some added features like brake lights would be really welcome here too. But ultimately, we think this bike succeeds in bringing together streamlined design and solid performance into a bike that should be appealing to city cyclists and commuters looking for a cool upgrade that's definitely going to stand out from the crowd. Thanks for sticking with me through this review. If you'd like to read more about our experiences on the bike, please check out the link in the video description, which will take you to our written review at electricbikereport.com. We'll also leave a link to the Tenways website where you can check current pricing on the 600 Pro and pick one up for yourself. Before we go, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help to grow and share more content with the world. We'd love to hear from you in the comments section too, so let us know if you have any questions and what you thought about our review. That's all for today. Again, I'm John with Electric Bike Report, and this is the Tenways CGO600 Pro.